Okay, so Psalm 77 is where we're at today. Sorry, we're so far away. I kind of got set up, but anyway, we'll get through this. But Psalm 77, and this is again a psalm of Asaph. So not from David, but again from this priest who wrote many hymns, wrote many of these songs, and would have been sung again in a kind of a public setting. But this Asaph, this psalm, as we walk through this, has 4 different stages to it. It's like the author changes his perspective as he progressively goes through this song. And so we'll read the first 4 verses, and this is the speaker or the author's current condition. He's explaining where he's at currently, emotionally and spiritually. Psalm 77, starting verse 1, says, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. Thou holdest my eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. So the author, Asaph, here says, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice. And so he says it twice. And again, when they say that stuff twice, it really shows that emphasis. The emphasis is on, it's my voice that I'm doing this with. I'm not asking others to pray for me. I'm not, as a family, we're going to pray for this. I'm the one that's daily crying out. I'm the one that's doing this regularly, very emotionally. And God gave ear to me. He acknowledges that. God did listen. God gave ear to me. In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night, or that idea of the soreness in my body. Physically, whether it's a physical issue he's praying about, or spiritually, and then that pours over into physical issues, which we all know that can happen. Physically, you can get very depressed and upset and even physically hurting. And so it says that, describing here, that it's my body that's hurting, and it hurts all night long. It ceased not, my soul refused to be comforted. Spiritually and physically, I'm in a mess. There's just nothing I can do. And yet in verse 1, God did hear him. God did give ear to him. So he acknowledges that, but the trouble keeps continuing. There doesn't seem to be immediate comfort, and that's what's going to get this guy. That's what's going to get the author. He gets frustrated at this point. I remembered God and was troubled. Some translations say, I remembered God and I got angry. And I think of, I've never been in a situation like this, but I think of, you're surrounded by so much sadness, so much sorrow that's directly hurting you, and you think about God, it makes you mad. I don't know, that's very discouraging, I think. It might come out as the emotion of anger at that point, but to say, I am so hurting that thinking that God is in control right now doesn't help me. Thinking that God has me in his hand, thinking that God is seated at the right hand, I'm seated with him in the right hand of the Father. All of these spiritual analogies and truths that we can take and say, that's praise God, that makes me encouraged. In the middle of all this hurt, he's not happy. He's angry, he's troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. And so he's finding no relief, he's lashing out. I think literally lashing out at God. Complaining, not wanting to remember God, angry or troubled when he hears about God, and his spirit is overwhelmed. Emotionally, I just picture crying uncontrollably, just so many, or so depressed, reclusive, pulling away from other people, sitting in a dark room. I mean, however you wanted to look at this, he's in a bad place physically and spiritually. Verse 4, thou, and he's saying, you, God, you're the one that holds my eyes waking. You're not letting me sleep. He's now blaming God. He's saying, God, you're the one that's, physically, you're holding my eyes open, so I can't go to sleep. I'm overwhelmed. I'm complaining against you. I'm lashing out at you. I'm hurting physically, and now I can't even sleep. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. So that's his current state. That's where we find this guy. Okay, not a really good place. But this is so, I don't want to say typical, but these are Psalms that what's neat about the Psalms, and David did this several times, is he describes it like it is. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to say, it's just a beautiful day in paradise, I love this, and no problems at all. He describes some pretty tough times where his sons were lashing out at him, or physically people were trying to kill him, or other nations were coming in to attack him. And so for Asaph here, he's being very honest, and this is where he's at. He's not finding comfort in God. He's, in fact, hurt. It hurts more to think about God. He can't sleep physically. All this is going on. Now, in verse 5 through 9, we see the second point. It's the second stage. It's the speaker's considerations of God's involvement or lack of it in his life. He thinks God is not being involved. And so it progressively, at this point, it's getting worse. He doesn't have a healthy image of God yet. He's not getting the right perspective. Verse 5, I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? And will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy clean gone forever? Doth his promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Verse 5, I considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. When I read that, I pictured the phrase a lot of times people say today, remember the good old days. I can't, but remember the good old days. Remember the good old days. And Ruth was laughing. There was a lady that she knows that was telling her that her birthday was coming. Well, it was December 10th as well. And it was 3 days, she was born 3 days after Pearl Harbor. And my wife was like, wow, that I consider this lady not old, but older. And yet you think of like World War II veterans. Those guys are, they're in their 90s now, if not in hundreds, and not very many of them left. And so a lot of times you hear those, or you think of that, well, that was those were the good old days. Let's think back at that time. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for this writer here, he's looking back into not necessarily the old, hundreds of years ago or something, but he's looking back at his own life. And he's looking back at maybe a few years back or a few months back. And he remembers those times, and he remembers times when things were good. He remembers times when he interacted with God in a really, really healthy way. I commune with my own heart, my spirit, he remembers his song. It says there in verse 4, he remembers his song in the night. He remembers when God would give him music to sing. God would give him inspiration for songs. It was beautiful, and he communes with his own heart, remembering, and just what's the word? I can't even. I'm trying to think of what the right word would be. Just regurgitating thoughts and ideas of good times in the past, healthy things, not necessarily bad, but it stops there. Unfortunately, my spirit made diligent search, and then right away he goes to verse 7, 8, and 9. He gives up to 6 different questions. He states 6 different questions that are all, when we're in our right minds and we're doing okay physically, and spiritually we're in a healthy place, we look at these 6 questions and go, this is ridiculous. Why would anyone think up these 6 questions? Will the Lord cast off forever, and will he be favorable nor? I guess he's done. I guess he's done with me. In the past, he gave me a song in the night. In the past, he let me commune with him. In the past, I had this great relationship, but I guess we're done. I guess it's over with. There's a term people will use when people start talking that way. It's called catastrophizing. Catastrophizing, I would say. It's when you take a problem and you just blow it up. And I do that. We all come to do that, where we go, oh man, the tire's flat. This is horrible. This is it. Might as well, and you just blow it out of proportion. And kids will do that up to adults. We all do this. And this is what he's doing here. He's blowing things out of proportion. He's getting really, really upset. But again, it's coming from an honest place where he's frustrated. He's very frustrated. The questions that he asks, though, are very relevant questions. They're questions that are being asked today. And they're questions that people think they know the answers to. And the fact that they're not answered here, and the fact that we understand in the entirety of Scripture that these are not true, will God cast off forever? Well, he's not going to cast off the nation of Israel forever. That's for sure. Several times, even on our message on Sunday, we're looking into that, just prophecies and promises where God specifically told his people, I love you, you're my witness, you're here to be a witness to the Gentiles. I'm going to punish you for a time. I'm going to bring you back, though. You're going to be back to your nation again. And all these promises are true, and he's kept all of them up to this point. What's to say he's going to break one? Of course he's not going to cast off forever. Will he be favorable? Nor I sure hope not. He'd been gotten tired of me a long time ago. been so wishy-washy and can get on my own, like the waves on the sand of the waves on a beach, back and forth, back and forth. He better stay favorable to me if I have any hope of heaven, if I have any hope of living the Christian life. His mercies are His mercy. Verse 8, are His mercies clean, gone forever? The prayer that was mentioned, that verse, reminding us of that verse, His mercies are new every morning. That's huge. That His mercies will never run out. It starts right back up again. It fills up and it's ready to go again for us the next day. His mercies are not gone. Will His promises fail forevermore? We rely daily on His promises. I need those to keep going. Has God forgotten to be gracious? His mercy, His grace are never ending. Has His anger shut up His tender mercies? There will be a time, and I think this is when this is probably the scariest time of, the scariest part of what the end times will look like, is God's judgment. Not necessarily His uncontrolled, flashed out anger, but His judgment leads to eventually cutting off, saying, my mercies and grace, they are done for right now. I've offered them for this long. I've given provision, I've given prophecies, I've given my word, I've sent missionaries, I've done all this to this world. Now it's time to stop. It's not that my grace and mercy has run out, but I'm pulling back because it's time for judgment. It's time for judgment. But again, that's not the topic. The question is, will those grace and mercy run out? Will God stop giving that to me? No, I'm one of His children. And He's made that promise, He's going to keep it. Our third point is the speaker reflecting on what God has done and will do. He gets positive. And he starts, what he does here is he switches gears from where he was at just previously. He called to remember the past. He was looking back to the good old days. Okay, he was remembering when God was with him, when God was doing great things with him. Verse 10 says, and I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all thy work and talk of thy doings. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. So it goes back there in verse 10. The first statement is critical. He said, this is my infirmity. When I hear that, I think of he has acknowledged where he's at and he's content with it. This is my infirmity. This is my sickness. It's where I'm at. Paul, I think, had to come to that acknowledgement when he struggled with that thorn in the flesh, and he prayed, God, please give me, take this away from me. Please take this away from me. I really want this to be taken away because I could do so much if I didn't have this infirmity. I could do so much. And God said, my grace is sufficient for you. I'm not taking it away. Here's more grace. In fact, if you need more, just ask. But I will give you the strength to deal with it, but I'm not going to pull it away. I'm not going to pull away that infirmity. And so for Asaph here to say that very same thing comes to that, he realized that same conclusion. God's not taking this away. Whether it's a physical sickness, whether it's an addiction, whether it's a struggle with a certain person, whatever it might be, God's not letting that go. God's not taking that away. God's not allowing you to escape it. He's giving you this, and for Asaph, he's content finally. He's not fighting at God with it. He's not staying awake at night thinking about it. He's saying, you know what? I will do this. In the New Testament, we call this is my cross to bear. This is the suffering that God has called me to experience. But I will remember the days, I will remember the years, the right hand of the Most High. So he says it's okay, I'm content where I'm at, I'm content with this struggle, but I'm going to look back in the past again. Now he just looked back in the past in verse 6. I remember the days of old, I remember the good old days, okay? He just did that. That experience, though, in verses 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all there, he looked back in the past and he stopped right there. That's the key I want to look at is he said, I'll remember, and that's all he did. He just remembered. Here, Asaph changes his tune. He remembers, and then in verse 12 he says, I will meditate also on thy works that are happening right now, and I will talk of your doings. That's the difference. That's the key. That's the ability that any of us have to pull out of, whether we want to call it depression, whether we want to call it a physical illness, whether we want to call it an addiction, whatever it is. That's what pulls us out of it when we say, I'm going to start opening my mouth and actually talking about it. I'm going to do an action based on what I know. and I've met people, and I've done this myself, where you look back and you go, wasn't God so good a year ago? Oh man, we could talk about it for days. God was so good back then. And then it might help us for a short time, might keep us happy for an hour, might keep us happy for a few days. And then as soon as those memories are gone, we're back to the same old, oh man, this is terrible. What a horrible place we're in. And the problem is that we forget, if God was good a year ago, did God stop being good today? Is God not working today? Is God, maybe the world, maybe physically I'm in a worse place right now than I was a year ago. But God's still on the throne. God's still working. And that's what Asaph says here. I will talk of your doings. And the idea is, I will talk of your doings right now. What are you doing right now? Maybe I'm not right in the middle of it. Maybe I'm watching it as a third person. But I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to meditate on your works. I'm going to take all the things that are going on around me. I'm going to meditate has that idea of rethinking it. Allowing what has happened, what you have heard, all this information you've received, letting it cycle through your brain, processing it again, and saying, okay, how could this situation be glorifying to God? If God let this happen, which I know He did, and I believe He's sovereign, I'm not going to believe that He's fell off the throne or something got past Him. What is He doing with this? Why would He let this happen? And that's part of healing. That's part of getting out of that slump of, oh, poor, pitiful me. You get out of that slump because you're thinking on the things of God. Verse 13, your way, God, is in the sanctuary. And again, for David, that was where God was, in the sanctuary of the temple, the sanctuary of the tabernacle. In this case, it would have been, most likely, this would have been David, but in the temple for sure. That's where God was. That's where the presence of God could be seen. But God's everywhere. And so Asaph recognized that as well. The way of God would be clearly seen. You could hear about the ways of God. You could hear His scriptures read. That's where it could be found. Who is so great a God as our God? I think that's an amazing thing. I want to put that on the church sign, I think, just because it's such a beautiful, we're kind of boasting about our God. Not saying He's ours, nobody else's, but it's our God. He's the greatest God. We can kind of boast on Him. That's something we can definitely do without any reservation. Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared Thy strength among the people. I'm going to talk about your works, God, but you do a great job yourself. And that's another neat thing about who God is and His character, is whether it's through creation, whether it's through His people, whether it's through even the conscious light that He gives every single man, whether it's a little bit of grace so that as human beings we don't just go into cataclysmic sinful acts all the time. God has done so many things to reveal His truth to mankind. Even the unsaved world knows there's a God. And they've suppressed it. They've pushed away that truth. They've tried to dilute it. They've tried to do everything that they can with it. But God has shown Himself to the world. And that's an amazing truth that we can always hang on to and be blessed by. And the last and final point here is referencing God's miracles, specifically describing the Red Sea crossing. Okay, so he just got done saying, I'm going to remember your works. I'm going to talk about your doings. I'm going to look back at history and remember something that God is doing. And that starts at verse 15 through 20. Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, Selah. The waters saw thee, O God. The waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And there's a lot of different references there, but the conclusion by most studying that, verses 15 to 20, is that's describing the Red Sea crossing. Okay, and so thine arm, God, speaking of God, his work as a redeemer, he is redeeming, saving, literally saving physically at this point, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. The fact that he mentions Joseph is interesting because Joseph is just one of the 12 tribes of Jacob. And yet, in this particular incident, Joseph would have been there in mummified form. His bones were being brought back. And that's always a neat thing, I think, of just Joseph's desire to be back in the promised land. He knew he was brought to Egypt for a reason. He knew he was there to save his people. And then before he died, he said, please don't let me be buried and stay here in Egypt. Bring me back. Bring me back. And so Joseph would have physically, at least in body form, his bones were there with him. And so most people believe that as Israel was leaving, exiting Egypt as slaves, they were bringing back Joseph. And so they had Joseph with him, and God is giving, just blessing the sons of Jacob as they head out to do this. And they get to the sea, and it says the waters saw God. The Red Sea saw God. And you think of God, again, we know he's the creator. We know he's in charge of everything. Jesus proved that with calming the seas. He was literally in charge of, he could stop the storms, start storms, stop storms, walk on water, all those things. And so the picture here is that the seas, and this, some wonder if it's just that it's more of just a fun joke to look at this way as a funny illustration, but the power of God parted those waters. I mean, we're not talking a little brook, we're not talking about a little river, a huge sea, a huge body of water. It parted, and the idea here in verse 16, whether we could describe it as poetic or whatever the case is, the waters wanted to run away from God. They knew what God was going to do. They knew that God was going to move and push and make this great divide. They fled. They fled. The waters saw thee, and they were afraid, and the depths were troubled. The waters poured out. They parted. The picture seems to be here that there was a storm too. We know there was a lot of wind. We know there was most likely lightning. I didn't go back to read the reference exactly in Exodus of exactly what was described during that crossing time. It was, phenomenal, amazing for sure. But the clouds poured out water. The skies sent out their sound. Lightning and thunder were everywhere. The earth trembled and shook. It was a massive thing. It wasn't something that was just small and incident. There was most likely, we know there was a strong wind. Moses went up there, sent out his staff. It parted. Everyone crosses. Verse 19, the ways in the seas and thy path in the great waters, thy footsteps are not known. God led them through that. God, along with Moses and Aaron, led his people through that Red Sea crossing. The ground was dry. It was absolutely positively a miracle. And he led them through that. As verse 20 says, they lead thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. God's appointed men. He picked them. He chose them for that position with all their weaknesses, all their flaws. And they were the physical leaders that then led the people, and God led them as a flock. He was a good shepherd. Got them through there. Great, amazing miracle. And again, that's just one, and you think about that, that's just one story. We'd have, as children's Bible story books, you have whole stories that we get used to reading them and saying, oh, it's a cute story and it's true and we love it. But think of it, that's a miracle. It's an amazing thing that God did. And Asaph here says, I'm going to dwell on those stories. That's what I'm going to keep going back to. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to meditate on it. And that's what's neat, to meditate on these stories that maybe go, oh, I've heard that since I was 8 years old. Well, great, but meditate on it again. Think about all that had to transpire for that event to occur, or just the supernatural power that God would have had to show to make that happen. A neat thing one commentator read about this particular event, the Red Sea crossing, was that Asaph is focusing on it because, one, it showed God's deity. This had to be a God thing. Nobody else, no other person, no sleight of hand, no magician, definitely no God that they just experienced in Egypt could have come up with something like this. And it was definitely supernatural. So it came from God, and it showed off supernatural abilities and powers that there was no natural force. There was not even a biological or earthly force that could cause that thing to part like that, the Red Sea to part like that. But it's extremely comforting, and Asaph would have known that. He would have known these stories very well, and he's using that to apply everything else he's just learned. He came from a bad spot, and by considering and meditating on the things of the Lord, he comes back to this healthy position of, you're my God. I'm not going to give this up. You've always been there for me. You haven't given up on me. I will daily be the one that is praising and glorifying you. So, neat psalm. Again, that only happens when somebody knows the Lord, though. And that's what's sad about those who don't know Jesus, don't accept Christ as Savior. They don't have that relationship to go back to that. Wow, God, you were so great then. Wow, God, you did so much for me then. There's no relationship, and that's the sad part for But someone that knows the Lord, suffering and tribulations are hard, but you have that relationship you can go back to. So, any questions about that or other thoughts?